welcome to Skills to Pay the Bills and today's segment of Build Your Difference. My name is Pierre Walters and I'm joined today by Brittany Walters. We are co-founders of Brand Desk, where we work directly with visionaries to help build incredible brands.
That's right, Pierre. But how do visionaries get the word out about their ideas, services, and brands? Well, one way is to start a podcast. But so many people want to start a podcast and have no idea where to begin. That's why on this episode of Build Your Difference, we're discussing some practical tips you can use to help build and launch your very own podcast. Let's get started. Pierre, what's the first step?
Well, I would say establishing a schedule. All right, that's the first step to any good, I think, reoccurring program, right? If you're going to do a podcast, what is your schedule? What can you sort of rely on as this is the time that I can commit to getting this done on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever it may be. Just get that schedule together. How long each episode should be? What's your experience with sort of podcasts lengths? What do you feel like, when you're thinking, I want to listen to a podcast, how much time are you ready to commit?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I feel like it's one of those things where people will be really concerned and like overthink it, where they're like, oh, should it be short? Should it be long form? But when I think about myself as a podcast consumer, and maybe that's a great place for others to start too, is to think of how they consume podcasts. Whether it's short or long, I think what matters is just the content that's involved, what value you're offering in there. But if you wanted a hard number, probably anywhere from something as short as 8 minutes to something as long as an hour and a half. Just depends on the nature of the conversation, what's being talked about.
Right.
What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think about a half hour is pretty much where I'm comfortable.
Yeah, that's like a good average of
Yeah. But the other thing is when it comes to committing to a weekly schedule of doing a podcast or a bi-weekly schedule, whatever the schedule is, the other question that naturally comes to mind is, well, how do I actually do the recording? And if you're listening and if you're watching and you're thinking, my goodness, I don't have a studio in my house. I don't have expensive audio equipment to record my podcast. That means I can't make a quality podcast. I want to say that's not the case. Not the case at all. Because really, it's about, quality is important, but what's even more important is, what did I say, quality? What's even more important is the content.
That's true.
So what I mean is the quality of the recording is important, but what's even more important is what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's is the content of the podcast. And I think if it's entertaining, if it's informative, if it's fun, if it's engaging, then, you can get away with not having the expensive equipment.
People may be a little bit more forgiving. Especially if they see that it's a brand new podcast that's come out, they might give it a chance.
Right. One of the things that I like to do when recording the Build Your Difference podcast is I have just a mic that I just plug right up to my iPad.
Yeah.
I just open up GarageBand and I just start talking.
Yeah.
In terms of my setup, it's really that simple. But guess what? Earlier today, I recorded a podcast episode and I didn't have my mic. I didn't let that stop me. I just turned on the iPad, hit the record button, and recorded my podcast just talking to my iPad. Is the quality the same like it normally is with the microphone? No, it's not. But the content is still there, and what's important is I'm honoring that consistent schedule that I know that our listeners are sort of expecting.
Yeah. So it sounds like really what's important is, like you said, write things down, have a plan, list it out so that you understand what you're going to be talking about, what kind of value you hope it's going to give people, how often you're going to do it, and how long you're going to aim for each episode. And once you have that information worked out, then it's about being consistent and recording your podcast on your schedule like you said you would.
Right.
What do you recommend for someone trying to do a podcast? Like, what is consistent? I know like on YouTube, I think it's recommended to do like one video a week at the minimum. What would you say for a podcast?
I would say one a week is actually a pretty fair thing to sort of bat for.
Okay.
But if you're just starting out, that even one a week might feel a little much because the challenge might not be sitting down and doing the actual recording.
Yeah.
The challenge might actually be in the content. Right? Like what am I saying? Do I have enough time each week to write a script?
Yeah.
So here's one of my little hacks, to kind of help me with content.
That's great. People love hacks.
I will just go on Google.
Yeah.
I will type in a topic or a keyword, and I'll look for news on that topic, and I'll pick an article, and that article is the episode. Okay. So if there's an article on Forbes about top 10 marketing tools or something like that, then I will make that an episode. And what I'll do is I'll read the article in the episode. So I'll turn on, I'll start the recording, I'll introduce myself, I'll read the article, and every so often I'll stop reading and I'll offer my commentary.
To make it your own.
Exactly, or to sort of give some color.
Yeah.
Okay, but at the same time, with that particular approach, we have to be careful to remember to properly credit and cite the source. So I do make sure I say which website I'm getting the articles from, or who the author is, what the website is, when it was published. So you want to make sure you do the formality so that everyone's getting the appropriate credit.
Of course.
But I'm offering my insight on this particular article that's discussing whatever it is that it's discussing. That's an easy way for me to just get in and do a podcast episode and provide some value without necessarily needing to spend a lot of time writing a script.
Yeah, totally. That's really good advice, Pierre. Yeah. And then, of course, another exciting thing folks can do is maybe have a guest of some sort. Once you kind of get a little more into the flow, and let's say you've done, an episode or two, and you're like, okay, I want to mix it up a little bit. You could bring someone on with you.
Right.
That person could also talk right into whatever setup you have for recording your voice, whether it's into an iPad or into a small little microphone you might find. And then that's a good way to add a dynamic to your podcast too.
Or you could even just record a conference call.
Right.
Okay.
Because no one is going and sitting with each other and talking anymore about having a mask on.
Yeah, and also things like Zoom. Make that really easy and free. So, this is the pandemic. At this point, we should all be at least somewhat familiar with Zoom and, those Skype and those types of services that really help to bring people together remotely, right? So, you can use those services to connect with others and to, in doing so, record your podcast. Just like that. So if you can't get together in person, we can do it remotely, over a phone call, over Zoom, over Skype. There are really so many ways to connect. I also want to say that, I really love your suggestion of bringing in a guest. And I want to emphasize that in addition to that, we can also share a personal story or an experience that you may have had in your own life, and you just want to spend an episode talking about this experience or this anecdote from your own life, and you want to share that with your listeners. So we don't have to get so hung up on the time that it takes to write copy and to write a script, and everything has to be perfect. Look, nothing is going to be perfect, especially when you're just beginning.
Perfection is the enemy of progress. You always want to get to a place where it's good enough to just put it out there. Now, no one's saying you shouldn't maybe proofread whatever, wording is going to be attached to your podcast, like if you're going to do a transcript or anything like that, if you really need to for your specific audience. You definitely want to, take the time and just take a pass, make sure things are spelled correctly. But I think what we mean when we say things like it has to just be good enough is like, don't get too lost in the details. If you get to a place where you feel like you've been stuck at a certain task on your checklist, and it's been a long time, like longer than you really, really want it to be, then something else is holding you back. You just got to get in there, do what you have to do, and then move to the next step. Right. And it'll get better as you continue to do it, And
I think that's important to just always remember that. It will get better the more you
No grandmaster was a master the first time they did anything.
Exactly. You can just, continue to refine. And at the end of the day, why do people listen to podcasts?
Yeah.
It's a sense of community. Absolutely. It's a sense of familiarity. It's really in many ways is the new radio.
That's a good point here.
Not everything
is the new radio.
Exactly. Not everything was perfect on radio. Radio is we still have radio.
Yeah. But that took a long time to evolve, I'm sure. Yeah. But I'm sure the thing that really kind of got people excited about that medium is the thing that's getting people excited with podcasting, and it's that that ability to just share those stories. People love to hear stories.
Right.
And we have ways to do it, of course, through social media and pictures and things like that. But being able to hear someone tell you a story, to watch them tell you a story, that's never getting old.
Right.
And that's another thing too. You know, people might be hesitant to start because they feel like, oh, the market is oversaturated, right? Well, I mean, the market will always be oversaturated, right? But what you have to bring is important.
Right.
So get out there and you know, do the best you can with what you have where you are. Make your podcast. You'd be surprised what community, you know, gets gravitated towards you because you're talking about something that they're interested in a way that speaks to them. But you wouldn't even know that if you didn't take the chance and make that first podcast, right?
Sometimes the hardest thing is just starting.
Yeah.
But if you can overcome that and just start, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not planned as well as the best plan. Okay, I remember recently I had a consultation with a professional podcaster, and I asked him some questions. I asked him, you know, what can I do to improve my podcast? And he gave me some real practical tips. But I was surprised at how practical they were. One was keep it short. Second was keep it consistent. Third was keep it interesting. I mean, you know, sure, I could spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on all the fancy equipment and all that stuff, but that's not; those aren't the core ingredients.
Right.
And it's important to keep that in mind.
That's true.
So we're going to take a quick break, but stay with us because we want to learn. We want to discuss how we all can do so much better with podcasting and how you can create your very own podcast as soon as you're ready to begin. We'll be right back.
We cannot approve the loan until your wife goes back to work. I'm sorry.
Housing discrimination isn't always obvious or straightforward, but it is against the law. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, protects your rights to equal opportunity in housing.
If you've experienced housing discrimination, HUD can help. They can pursue compensation for your injuries and protect your equal opportunity to housing free of discrimination.
Welcome back to Skills to Pay the Bills and this segment of Build Your Difference. Today, Brittany and I are discussing how anyone can build their very own podcast. Brittany, what's the next step?
Okay, so the next step. So we've talked a lot about what you can do to get things started, the planning that's important before you even do that. And now you've got a little something going on. You've got your little recording, you figured it out. Now it's time to get it to the masses. How do we do that? Is there a carrier pigeon that'll come and grab your digital file and take it somewhere?
Well, there might as well be. So I would recommend Anchor.fm.
Anchor.fm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anchor.fm. It's a free tool, and you can upload your completed podcast to their service, and they will actually distribute your podcast to most of the major podcast radio services like Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, whatever the other ones are. You know, there's a lot of them. And Anchor.fm really just kind of simplifies that process and makes it so much easier. You know, I remember when we first started our podcast, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe even earlier than that. We had to manually sync it to Apple iTunes with the RSS feed, and then we had to then manually go and do the exact same thing for Stitcher Radio and all these other servers, and it was just a real headache. So
I've nearly forgotten all the steps that were involved.
Oh my goodness, it was bad. It was bad because we couldn't when to pull that RSS feed, we couldn't just host our podcast or the files for the podcast on like a Dropbox or something. We had to host it on something that was publicly accessible, like an FTP service, or something that you can just, like a public folder in an FTP thing. Okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. This is all ancient history. Okay?
Ancient technology.
Yeah, ancient history.
Used by ancient human beings.
Right. What matters now is you can go to anchor.fm.
Yes.
And you can actually, what's kind of cool there is not only can you upload your completed podcast if you're like me and you want to record something in GarageBand or on your phone or on your iPad or something, you can actually make your podcast directly on the anchor.fm website.
Really?
Yeah, they have tools right there on their website that you can click and begin recording and just speak right to the computer and record your podcast, or even an app. Look, anchor.fm, it's a great resource. Absolutely no reason not to use their service or any other service to get your podcast out there, because there's really, at this point, no excuse.
Yeah, that's really exciting to know that something like an anchor.fm exists, and that you have just so many options for how to get started and for where to do it. Right.
And once your podcast is out there, how do you then sort of notify, friends, family, associates,
good point.
that it's out there, it's ready to listen to, and so for me, I would say email marketing. Send an email blast. What's some of the ways that you've experienced being notified about podcasts when new episodes are ready? What's your insight on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're really onto something when you say email marketing. The main ways that I get alerted when a new podcast episode is out from a show that I really like to listen to is through email notifications. Or I'll go inside of the platform of my choice to listen to a podcast, and I'll subscribe to that podcast and get a notification on my phone from that application to go and check it out. But even then, I think everything really is anchored in the email address, the email marketing that goes out.
What about social media? Does social media play a role at all in this?
Yeah, that's true. I can say there's been a time or two where either I missed it in my email, or I had my phone on silence or no notifications or something like that. But I may have gone on to something like a LinkedIn, checked out my feed, and saw right there on LinkedIn that a new episode has come out, because I'm following the podcast that I like there as well. And that's been a good way for me to be alerted too. So it sounds like, we've hit on a couple of things. The email marketing.
Right.
Posting it or making some kind of announcement on your social media platforms.
Right. Mm-hmm. And probably, I would maybe just adding on top of that, just, talk about it. Talk about it to your friends, talk about it to your family, put it on your website. Let people know it's ready.
Yeah.
It seems like a kind of a no-brainer, but oftentimes we get hung up in the logistics of things. Well, no one's going to listen to it. Oh, what am I going to do? Well, just tell people to listen to it.
That's true. Word of mouth is still a great avenue of marketing.
Yeah, it's probably the best avenue of marketing still. No matter everything else that's available, the email marketing, social media, all that. No matter all the other ways to sort of get a message out there, I don't know that anything has really yet to beat just word of mouth.
Yeah.
Okay. Word of mouth. Nowadays we call that going viral. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Go viral. Just go do it. I know, easier said than done. But
of course.
But sometimes, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Right. It's not the best analogy, but one bite at a time. Just decide that's what you're going to do, and then just take the steps necessary to get that to do it.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I would like to spend a little bit of time on is, so we've covered establishing a schedule, we've covered talking about a story or a takeaway or an experience, basically content.
Yeah.
And then we talked a little bit about distribution, how you can use services like anchor.fm to really distribute your podcast to a wider network, to your friends and family and your audience. But what about the sort of nitty-gritty of getting in there and actually, like working with professionals or making like the elements of a podcast, like for example, the intro, the outro. Okay, I know like it's easy to kind of gloss over all that kind of stuff, but a good podcast does have a nice catchy intro, a nice catchy outro, maybe a stinger in the middle, maybe some sort of templated processes and files or snippets that are reused each time.
Yeah.
And so that can be a little bit of a challenge, you know.
Yeah.
There are
Oh,
services.
and making the little image that represents your podcast once you get it uploaded to
Yeah, right. The graphic design.
Yeah.
Like just the cover art of the podcast itself. Because
Yeah.
if you use Anchor.fm, when you upload your podcast to those services, you are going to have to include a cover art image. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. So those things, thinking about those things can be a little overwhelming because I just want to get in and record. I don't want to think about all that stuff, okay?
Sure, yeah.
So, you know, are there services, are there resources out there that can help to kind of take some of that off my plate so that the systems are in place so I can just kind of get in and do what I want to do, which is actually do the show.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know of any systems that are in place to kind of help with things like that?
Yeah, there's definitely so many ways to get help on this topic. I would say, I guess I'll go two directions, right? It's either you have a little bit of a budget to hire some folks to help you, or you're kind of in the place where you're kind of doing it yourself and learning as you go and doing the best you can with what skills you have.
Right.
And so for the folks that have a little bit of a budget, you know, really consider hiring someone to give you some help. Whether it's like a course you could download. There's so many like course websites. There's Skillshares out there. There's Domesticas. There's so many places where you could go, even on YouTube. And YouTube might actually have some good tutorials for free. And you can look up something like, you know, how to plan a podcast, how to create a podcast, how to design all the pieces I need for my podcast. You know, you can look up specific questions and get specific answers. And that's a good way segue to someone maybe who doesn't quite have a budget to hire people to help them, you know, to pay for a graphic designer, to pay for an editor for your sound files or anything like that. I've said this before, Canva is a great tool to use.
Yeah, canva.com.
Canva.com.
Where you can go and there's already like pre-built templates.
Yeah.
And you can just kind of type in your theme or your topic and it's just like, here, use this template. And you just kind of replace the text with your title and your picture and you're good to go.
Yep.
You're right. I mean, that's a great resource. But I do want to kind of throw in a little something when we say if you don't quite have a budget.
Sure.
For your show, and I want to be, and I understand where you're coming from, and I want to be empathetic and compassionate.
Okay, no, this is great. I like where this is going. Go ahead.
Because not everybody has
Yeah.
a big budget to spend on, you know, delegating and outsourcing and all that kind of stuff, virtual assistants and hiring all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I want to instill in our audience that in many ways, part of building your difference really is investing in yourself.
You know, that is so true, Peter.
And, you know, if no one else is going to do it, you have to be the one to invest in yourself. And I almost don't take that as the idea that I don't have a budget and I can't do this as a real thing, because almost everything that's important to us, everything that we really want to do, we're willing to find the resources for. We're willing to say, you know, there's a trip I want to take.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I need to do to get that money to take that trip.
That's
or
true.
There's a computer that I want to buy. There's a new cell phone I want to purchase and come down every 2 years, every year.
Yep.
You know, there's
there's a podcast I want to launch.
There's a podcast I want to launch. Exactly. There's a podcast I want to launch. I think you should have a budget. I don't know that not having a budget is really the right mentality, honestly. I mean, like I said, I'm compassionate and empathetic, you know, to those of us who, you know, our resources are stretched. This is a pandemic. Money is difficult for everyone and everything.
Yeah.
But if this is a priority, if this is something that you really want to do, then decide a reasonable budget, even if it's $20.
Right.
Even if it's $100.
Yeah.
Okay? Decide a reasonable budget so that you have some resource pool to then invest in yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars in having a producer and a writer and all these hosts and editors and all that. Maybe you just spend $15, $20 on a service, one of those Skillshare services or freelancer services, where you can just have someone just quickly make a nice cover art, so that at least it feels, like something that's true to your representation, something that represents what you're trying to convey.
Yeah. And you know what, Pierre, to piggyback off what you're saying, you're absolutely right, because nothing ever really is 100% free. If you were to try and get into an endeavor like this or anything that you want to start, and you feel like, oh, I don't have a budget, are the words that are coming out of your mouth or the thoughts you're having, that it's going to come out in some way, either in the amount of time and energy you're going to have to put into designing something when you know you're not a designer, or the amount of time and energy it's going to take to learn how to do some other aspect of the show that you really want to put on, that you have a vision for, that that's just not your wheelhouse. So it's a balance. You have to decide, how do I work this out? There's going to be some kind of budget, and it's either going to be worked out with dollars or with time and energy and effort.
Right. Yeah. And, look, where there's a will, there is a way. And if you have it within you to make a podcast, just do it. Just start. Look, I want to say thank you. Thank you for watching Skills to Pay the Bills in today's segment of Build Your Difference. Brittany and I, we're excited about the surge in entrepreneurship that's happening across the country and right here in our local community. And if you're just beginning, remember, creating your own podcast can be as simple as this. Establish your schedule, share a story or an experience with a takeaway, and distribute on anchor.fm. As always, don't forget the words of our favorite author, Octavia Butler. It's amazing what we can do if we simply refuse to give up.